Welcome back to Homeschoolers of Maine's Your Voice Matters video series. I'm Angela Hurd. Before I introduce our next two voices, I'd like to remind you to check out the Protecting Freedom page, where you'll find many resources for your family to utilize, such as the interactive Family and Freedom Unit Study, an in-depth literature study featuring Animal Farm, 1984, and Red Scarf Girl. There's news and resources to help you prepare for challenging times ahead. Also, Homeschoolers of Maine is collecting art and music and poetry and other writings from our homeschoolers around the state, highlighting their voices and their thoughts about protecting freedom. You can check the Protecting Freedom page to find out how to submit. Also, Homeschoolers of Maine will be highlighting our homeschooling families' veterans. Keep checking the Protecting Freedom page for more. I'm thrilled to introduce our next two voices, Pastor Chris Wilcoxson and Dr. Zach Mazone. Both are Homeschoolers of Maine board members. Pastor Wilcoxson is the founder and pastor of Life Source Ministries in Brunswick, Maine, and he and his wife are homeschooling their 7 children. And Dr. Zach Mazone is an osteopathic family medicine physician, and he has a practice called Day Spring Integrative Wellness in Bath, Maine, and he and his wife are homeschooling their children. Be encouraged as you listen to this conversation about medical freedom, individual and parent rights, making health choices, about homeschooling freedoms and faith, and more, as these two bring their unique perspectives to this series.
On behalf of Homeschoolers of Maine, we welcome you to this discussion on medical freedom. There's a lot of questions and concerns that have come up, and we'd like to help address some of those things. I'm joined here by Dr. Zach Mazone. My name is Pastor Chris Wilcoxson. We both have the privilege of serving on the board of directors for Homeschoolers of Maine for quite some time, and so we want to bring perspective to the conversation today, and I hope that this will be helpful to you. Dr. Mazone, would you mind sharing your background and what qualifies you for this conversation?
It's not just because I have thoughts, huh?
Right.
So my name is Dr. Zach Mazone. I'm a family medicine physician here in Maine. My background, I was in the Navy previously. I was in the Navy as a pilot. I was a pilot for American Airlines after that, and then had a change of career and in medicine now, and I do what's called integrated medicine, which is allowing people to integrate lifestyle changes into their life to be able to find health, and family medicine, which I love, and also have been on the board of directors, as you've noticed and noted earlier. And so there's been a lot of questions that have come in, oddly enough, not just on homeschooling freedoms, but also on medical freedoms. And so we thought it would be appropriate for us to address those from a family physician standpoint. I see patients all the time. It's very central to my practice to make sure that I'm doing a good job of caring for patients and hearing them and respecting them. And that's a part of medical freedom. So I think it's good. We've got some great questions that have come in today for us to talk about. We wanted to take those one by one, but before we do, I'm joined too here by Pastor Chris Wilcoxson. It's a pleasure to be able to do this today with him. And why don't you share a little bit about yourself, and then we'll start off on the questions.
Well, it's an honor to be able to address you today. I'm a pastor, as it was said. And whether it's spirit, soul, or body, we're interested, both of us are interested in health and in freedom. And so with this conversation, again, I'm honored to talk to you about it, but also I think some of the things that will get brought up today will not only be, not necessarily answers, but thought-provoking to be able to give you a defense for where you are, what you believe, and hopefully how you stand as we go forward in this culture that we're in right now. So with that, as I think I stated, there have been questions and concerns questions have kind of come out of this, and so I'd like to ask you a few.
Sure.
And so here's a great start. Who should decide what is best for one's individual health and or the health choices for one's children?
Oh, so we're starting out with a simple question.
Right, of course.
Who should decide? So I think it's important when we ask a question like that, all of us have a basis upon which we form our thinking, right? And those are different for different people, as to be expected. I think for transparency's sake, I think I need to share my basis. And certainly my basis is going to affect how I think. And I'm hoping, and I'm asking from a freedom standpoint, that you just listen to that basis and check the principles out, judge them according to the principles, take what you find to be good, get rid of the things that aren't so good. But I'm encouraging you, just listen to that. And the basis that I have is I am a strong Christian. I didn't grow up that way. But I've come to an understanding of who God is that is so powerful and so wonderful and so compelling. And I have to share, so beautiful, because the principles that I see that are reflected in Scripture and reflected by the life of Christ are so useful to life. And so it's not about saying, I'm a Christian and I'm part of this group and that's against this group. It's an individual issue. I'm a Christian because I love Christ, not because I have the right, wrong, different church, not because this people's better than that, because I love who Christ is. So that affects it, and it's going to affect what I say. But please, again, hear the principles. And why I bring this up is because if you look at those principles, there's great freedom in those principles because God wants each one of us to make a choice individually. There is no group that's going to help you become the right person. There is no government. I might be getting in hot water. There is no sports team. Woo! That's going to make you better than the other sports team.
Careful.
Yeah, I know. I got to be careful with that one. It's got to be an individual basis. And I think another thing that's really important when we're talking about freedom, because this is so central to it, we have to understand what freedom is based on. Now, I understand that there will be different viewpoints of that, but at least in our country, freedom was based on this notion in the Declaration of Independence that said we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If you take a look at what was written afterwards, there was a clear understanding that these rights of freedom, of life, of liberty, of pursuit of happiness, that these were given not by government. They were endowed, meaning they're part of you, by your Creator. They had a belief that they were created. Now you can decide for yourself whether you believe that or not, but what I'm saying is that our basis of freedom here was based on that knowledge that government didn't give you freedoms, and it wasn't government's place ever to talk about taking freedoms, because they weren't the one who gave you the freedoms in the first place. There was an authority above government that gave you freedom, and that it was supposed to be a gift individually. And the second point, which I think is really important as well, is that freedom, if you understand it from this context, is based on love. And I know that sounds a little soft, so work with me on this. It's based on love, but real love, meaning real love means you got to do the right thing. If you love somebody, you can't do something wrong to them. You can't steal from them. You can't treat them poorly. If you really love somebody, you're going to do the right thing, even when they're not looking. And the other part of love, not just justice and truth or doing the right thing, right? So you got to have justice, you have to have truth, but you also have to have mercy or kindness. Those two are linked in this system of freedom. You can't pull those apart. And mercy is you got to think about others. You got to think about your impact on how that's going to affect others. And there's got to be some humility in that, realizing that I can't think for you. You have your own views and your own beliefs, and I have to honor those. And I want you to honor mine. And so when we talk about love your neighbor, it's really love your neighbor as yourself. I don't want somebody to tell me what to do, and I don't want to tell them what to do. And the beautiful part about this is when we have that concept that none of us are perfect, we're all seeking after what is the best, then we don't have to fragment. We can listen to everybody. We can work together to try to come up with the best plan. That's freedom. When we respect everyone, when we listen, and when we really try to make sure that we're coming to the table doing our part.
Right.
So I know that's a big concept. Let's bring it back to the question. Who should decide was the question. Well, in that context, it's self-evident, right? We hold these truths to be self-evident, but this is self-evident too. It's got to be the person. The person has to decide. So in this kind of situation, if I make a recommendation to you, then you are the one who's going to decide on that, and here's why. It's because if there's a recommendation made for a medical procedure, and you do it, and it goes great, well, you get the benefit. That's great. That's wonderful. If that medical procedure goes wrong, and it could be surgery, or it could be taking a medication, or any medical procedure, if something goes wrong, you have to endure problems. And because you're the one who does it, if you get hurt, government isn't hurt, you're hurt.
Right.
If you get the benefit, great, that's good for society, but the government, separate issue. And so this concept of who should decide has got to be the individual. Now, from a medical standpoint, it's important to review our history too. After World War II, we realized that in Nazi Germany, there were some horrible things that were done to people in the name of medicine. There were several doctors in Nazi Germany that were doing experiments on people, resulting in their death. They were letting them freeze in cold water to see how long their fighter pilots, if they were in cold water, could survive. It's a noble goal to see how long somebody can survive, but to let somebody die in cold water to find out is not noble. It's not ethical. It's not free. That person didn't decide. And so there was a Nuremberg trial that happened after World War II, and there was a Nuremberg code that came out of that said, we are never going to let that happen again.
Wow.
Ethically, that was wrong to force people to do a medical procedure. Even if the goals were noble, it was absolutely wrong to force an individual to do something that was against their will. Right? There's that old quotation that I love that if a person's convinced against their will, they're of the same opinion still, right? You can't force somebody. And this just recognizes that fact. So out of that was the concept of what's called informed consent. Meaning, if you come to me as a family doc and I say, Chris, here's a recommendation for you. I got to give you information on, here are the benefits for you health-wise. And here are the potential risks for you if you do this. And then I give you those things and you make the decision. I don't make the decision for you, right? You make the decision. That's informed consent. And if you say at any point, I don't consent, it's off. It's done. So we've held for our nation's history, we've held this concept that individual liberties are what our whole government is based on. And so in medicine, that's still so vital, because you're going to make mistakes. So am I. And if I tell you to do something and force you to do something and I make a mistake, I've now hurt you. And so you have to be the one who steps up and say, I'm willing to do this or I'm willing not to. Anything short of that has always been, since the Nuremberg trial, and I would say even before, has been bad medicine. And we don't want to practice that. So the individual has to make their own choices. Now the second part of that question, it's a hard first question, was who should decide for your kids? Now I joke about this and I always say, that corporation, how many kids do they have? Oh, that government, how many kids do they have? Governments aren't real. They're not alive. I mean, I shouldn't say they're not real. Of course they're real, but they're not alive. They're not a live entity.
Right.
You and I are alive. A corporation is not a live entity. It can't have kids. People have kids, right? You've got kids. I've got kids. No one knows your kids like you do. And you have the best interest in mind of your kids' future. You know their past, you know their likes, their dislikes, and you want them to succeed. So you have the most amount of vested interest in those kids and the most amount of knowledge. And so because of that, you're the one who should make the choice for your kids. The parents should make the choice. Now I hear some people talking, and that's okay. What about those times when parents make horrible decisions? What about the parents who don't really care? Yes, that exists. What about the government stepping in at those times? Yes, I agree. We need to take care of our whole society. But the overwhelming majority of the time, overwhelming majority, the parents really do care most for the kids. And they're going to be there for the kids. If it goes right or goes wrong, they're going to be there. And so we don't make rules based on the minority of situations. We make rules based on the majority of the situation, right? And the overwhelming majority, parents try their best to make good choices. And they're the ones who have to deal with the consequences too. So again, it goes to them and realize that, yes, humans make mistakes, but governments are filled with humans, and governments make mistakes. So we have to be careful not to think that the government's always going to be right, because it's human, or that we're always going to be right. We have to work together to make sure that we're making a safe environment for our kids. So hands down for me, the question is, you've got to make it. Who knows your kids better than you?
Absolutely. You know, what I hear is there's almost a tension between love and freedom. We have a government of, well, hopefully self-government.
Yes.
Personal responsibility, held in tension by love for one another, our family,
yes.
our neighbors, and making decisions based on what will do the greatest good for those in our care.
Yes.
And like you already brought out, no one knows our kids like we do.
No.
No one can make those decisions. We like you consent, information, the ability to receive from you as a doctor or any other, and then to be able to take that information and then weigh that against what I know about my child.
Yes.
Is invaluable.
Yes. Well, and I love what you said, Chris, because there's tension, and sometimes we don't like tension, right? I see a lot of this currently with the situation, that there's a lot of fear. Fear is what is challenging this concept of the basis of love, of trust, of self-responsibility. We're scared. And that can come out in anxiety or depression or confusion or, a number of different things.
Quite frankly, it can come out in control.
In control. Or it can come out in anger against control, right? So we can't lose sight of this tension of self-responsibility, because if we get in the mindset that someone else is going to take care of me and give me freedom, then you're scared that they might take it away. If you realize that you have been given freedom and you've got to take care of it, you look at it differently. And if you hold that intention with, and I've also got to help others do the same.
Yeah.
So this is really, really important medically too, because, and you know this, the people that do the best medically, it's the people that take the most self-responsibility for their health.
That's good.
A doctor can't force you to be healthy, right? They can only encourage it. So yeah.
So the next part of that question is, why does this matter? And I think that's kind of where you were going with that last piece. But is there anything else you would want to add to that question?
It matters because if you look at history, even though freedom is a gift, now I believe that's true for everyone. It starts with your own thinking. And that can be influenced by people, but it really starts there. Historically, down through human history, there's been a battle for freedom. People who want to force others to do what they want to do, versus respecting others and allowing them to have their own individual liberty. And the problem is that it's hard once you start to lose freedoms to get them back. Once you have a situation where somebody takes power, it takes a very special individual to take power and then give it back. And so the concern that I have is that, and I've heard this in medicine too, I'm supposed to tell people what to do. No, that's their job. I should never take that on myself. I am to encourage, I'm to inform. The whole term of doctor means to teach. I'm supposed to teach them, but the decision is still theirs. And why it matters is that once you cross that delicate boundary where the tension stops and you don't keep it balanced, it's hard to come back. And this is why we need to talk about it now. I know that we live in a rough society right now. There's a lot of fear and anger and difficulty. Part of the reason that we wanted to do this video was encourage a discussion. It's okay to disagree. It's okay to have different viewpoints. We can disagree and be agreeable. That's freedom. That's why it's important.
That's good. Do you see this at the heart of other freedoms, or how does this question impact our overall freedom?
Right.
Do you find it entwined, or is this kind of a separate issue?
I would love it if it was separate. It would be easier to handle.
Right.
When you're talking about who decides, you're talking about who decides in medicine, who decides in government, who decides in your daily life. This concept of freedom and making sure that the individual's right to choose is protected is the heart of all freedoms. And the scary thing is if you lose one, you will lose the other ones.
Domino effect.
All of them are together because the theories that are used to hurt the concept of individual freedoms apply to all these things. And we care about homeschooling freedom. We care about education. Not that I'm saying is everyone has to do homeschooling my way. You decide for your family, for your kids, what's right for their education. I want that same freedom because I love my kids and I'm trusting that you love your kids and you want what's best for them. So homeschooling freedoms, medical freedoms, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, plug it in. The concept is the same across the board. But we're talking more about medical freedoms, but it's a great point. It's all of them.
Okay. Well, okay, so will loss of medical freedoms lead to a loss of privacy? And what might our world look like ultimately without medical freedom?
Wow. I don't want to think about what it would look like because it's scary. I think we talked about some of this before because we've been talking about these. And Chris said, "Oh, that's just scary." And I agree. But what we're saying is the loss of medical freedoms. Will that loss of medical freedoms, if we allow that, lead to loss of privacy? Now, let's talk about loss of medical freedoms. When we say that a group of experts, when we say that a government, a corporation, or any other entity decides for another entity what they need to do medically, and again, you could say, well, what about people who can't decide for themselves? Well, that's when you have a court-appointed supervisor to be able to support them, or somebody who's a guardian to be able to take care of them. Certainly, those are unique situations. But for the majority, if we allow this concept that a group that doesn't have perfect knowledge and isn't perfect and doesn't have all the nuances of the individual decides for that individual, by definition, will lose privacy because that group will need to know all the information medically about the individual. If a group's going to decide for you, should Chris have a surgery? Well, they need to know what surgery and why would you need it and what were your risk factors. They need to go through all the things that you and I should go through. But if they're deciding now, they will have to have access to all your medical information, which we've said was wrong in our country because that's private. We've got HIPAA rules in our country, and we've had doctor confidentiality before this of there is a respect for privacy because we knew historically that when you lose privacy, you lose freedom. Again, those two are linked. And so the respect for privacy is a respect for freedom. And someone said, well, what if somebody's doing something wrong? Well, that's a risk that you take when you grant somebody freedom. And it's worth the risk. Versus, because there's risks on both sides, versus someone else decides for you. There's risk there too. Versus there's no privacy. There's risk then too. Is there risk if someone has all your information on your phone, on your computer server, right?
Right.
We know there's risks. And so the best way to do this is that you have to protect the individual's freedoms and respect their privacy. And if that person makes choices that start to hurt other people's liberty, other people's privacy, then that needs to be addressed in the public forum. Because it's not okay for you to infringe on someone else's freedoms as well. That's the thing that protects all of us. And so privacy doesn't become a bad thing. It's a trust thing. I trust that I don't need to know everything about you because I respect that you have freedom to choose for yourself. So yes, I think it will ultimately lead to that. And you can see countries where there's no medical freedom. There's certain countries, and I won't name the country, where they just have one child and no more. They're telling you what you can do. And certain countries that allow medicine to be done in a certain way, only this way. What happens when you start doing that is that someone's going to lose out because no one knows the situation better than the provider and the patient. That relationship of provider and patient is the core of good medicine. And if anybody gets into that, a hospital, a government, an insurance company, if anyone gets in between that, you start losing the beautiful part of that relationship, because if I'm a doctor and I work for you, I'm going to give you my best because I'm working for you. But if I'm splitting that by working with other people, now you become less important. And I would say that's a lot of the reason why we're having the concerns in our environment that we're having is we're not respecting privacy, we're not respecting freedom. And hopefully we can start turning that around.
Wow. Very good. Okay, so how do we help others resist a spirit of fear and live in a spirit of hope? Because let's face it, I mean, this is the culture we live in, right? It's everything, one big pot of raw emotion right now, basically.
Yeah, I know, you scratch the surface and you see it pretty easily. All right, so this is beautiful. I'm going to turn the table. What would you say to me? How do you resist a spirit of fear? How do you live in a spirit of hope? Because, again, this will be personal. I think you have to decide what spirit you're living in. And what we mean by spirit is, what's your general view on things?
Right.
Do you think things are going to fall apart in a minute? I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop, right? This is going to happen. That thing's bad is going to happen. Oh, it's a hard place to live. Versus a spirit of hope. I would say for me, it's a choice. And it's a self-responsibility. And you got to choose it. And I'll let you in a little bit. That's hard for me.
Yeah.
It's easy for me to say, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. And I can feel myself becoming, right, just kind of more frustrated and angry. It takes a real inspiration to pull back and say, wait, that's not the way I want to live.
Right.
I want to choose something better. But again, I ask you, what are your thoughts on that? How do we help people with that? Because that's just as much a relational issue as it is a medicine issue.
It is, and it starts internally. We have to determine who am I allowing to tell my narrative?
Oh, that's good.
Who's controlling the narrative around me? Certainly, we can have, whether it's news media or the medical profession or whatever. There's so many voices today that can make it very hard to know what's true, what's not. So a lot of discontent, a lot of confusion, quite frankly.
Yes.
So first and foremost, we were talking about freedom in the first question, is that before I consider an external freedom, I got to look at freedom from inside here. Am I free? Am I free in my conscience? Am I free in my belief system? What is true to me? When I know who I am, I'm better to help someone else discover what's right for them, to be able to know my story. And so, first and foremost, I think hope has to start with me. I don't know where the world wants to go, but I know where I want to go.
Right.
And so I chart that course.
Right.
And hopefully, again, here comes tension again. No one lives as an island where
Right.
we don't exist alone,
Right.
period. And so everything that we determine and choose affects someone else. And So yes, our belief system, just the willingness to put our foot down and allow myself, to determine my narrative. And yes, I pray that it would, hope that it would include my family, my friends, my world, in that, in a self-giving kind of way. But at the same time, I know where I'm responsible. I can't change the world by tomorrow.
Right.
But I could start to change my inner world by thinking on things in a different light. Just in the first two questions, some of the things that you've shared. Again, whether anyone else agrees with it or not, it is a perspective.
Sure.
And if we're willing to listen to one another, if we're willing to try, not listen to give an answer, but listen to genuinely understand, sometimes we can begin to realize that, they're not out to steal my joy or my hope. Granted, there's the exceptions, but at the same time, hope starts with us.
I love that.
For me, like you said at the beginning, that's Jesus. For me, it's my faith. It's my peace that the world didn't give me. Again, I may not be able to control out there, but I know how to turn the news off. I know how to protect my family and what I have in my home. And yes, we hope that would filter out beyond those four walls. But at the same time, hope is something that, to me, I don't want to let go of. Now, we recognize that there's lots of people who are struggling to they're not struggling to keep it, they're struggling to find it.
Right.
And that's where I believe community comes in, and we may hit on those things in a little bit.
Yes.
But we need one another. When one's down, somebody can pick them up, if and vice versa.
Right.
But there's truth in the old proverb that a threefold cord is not easily broken.
Right.
And I don't know how we keep hope without a bigger community.
Well, I love what you said from the concept, and what's intriguing to me is, so you answered the question. We're talking about this from a medicine standpoint.
I asked you, and you...
Yeah, but the answer to that question, the people that do that medically that I see,
yes,
are the people that have the least amount of anxiety, that have the least amount of fear, that have the least amount of depression. The people that really start to say, wait a second, let's take a time out. Let's look at this honestly, humbly. Meaning, what do I control? What do I not control? What can I do? What can I not do? And the people that really focus on what can I do instead of what can I not do. Because what I can't do, you can get paralyzed emotionally and mentally by all the things you can't do. I can't control the government. I can't control medicine. I can't control where this is going. And so you just get locked and fearful. But if you can break that and say, yeah, but what can I control? Well, I can control my response.
yes,
I can control how I think. I can control what I give. That's where freedom starts, medically and otherwise. And the people that do that in my practice are the people that find the greatest health. But there was another thing that I think is really important. There's this concept of freedom, that freedom can be top down, meaning it's given, and that somehow someone has to give it to you as a right by other people. But you brought up something that I think is really important. It's another principle, and these principles come together, was it starts with you. It starts with what you believe. It starts with you choosing hope, and it starts with you saying, I can make a difference. And then that individual difference, that positive, that hope that comes from, yeah, but I can do something, naturally grows into relationship. Now, it could be a relationship with two, but then that relationship with two is benefited. And then it grows into a relationship with more, and that can be family or community or a group that you're part of, but it grows into more. A healthy individual then helps other people become healthy, then helps a community become healthy, then helps a society become healthy. I can only speak for myself, but I have never seen this principle any other way. It has to start with the individual, and it has to grow there in health. You can't help your kids be healthy or your wife be healthy, or your parents be healthy, or your church be healthy, or your community be healthy if you're not working on it yourself.
Right.
But if you do, then all of a sudden people that are around you, your friends go, hey, you're looking pretty good. Hi. You say, I've learned something new and this is good and I'm having hope. And that person says, well, what are you doing? And then all of a sudden the two of you start having that health. And then all of a sudden you can talk to your kids or to friends. It's a beautiful concept. Remember that hope starts with the individual, but like freedom, to find its fulfilled purpose, it's got to be shared. It's got to be shared. And our society needs that so much.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can't control forever. You can't control your kids. You can teach them and hope that they will end up making the right decisions.
I've tried that a few flawed times.
It doesn't always work because we're not controlling how they believe.
I know.
We can teach, and hopefully they will pick up those beliefs, the ones that stick, and then be able to make those decisions for themselves. And I think that is, as a doctor, I may need to hear it more than once to be able to make that and feel comfortable with making the right decision.
Right.
But if you mandate it, I don't get that luxury of getting comfortable with it.
No, and it's not your decision. And so let's talk about mandates, and I'm not trying to get into hot water. Just hear this concept. A mandate, even if you agree with the mandate and say, hey, that's a good idea. Even if you agree, the concept of a mandate should give you pause. Here's why. Once we say that mandates are okay, that you can mandate and force somebody to do something that is against their will, then you're saying that even if I agree with that mandate at a future time, as the winds of belief change in society, which they always do, then it's okay for another group to mandate something that I strongly disbelieve in. So we must be careful with this concept. I am not against people trying to help others be healthy. I'm not against government saying, we really believe you should do this, and that this is the science that we're seeing, and we want to have a healthy society. That's beautiful. But when we get to a concept that we need to force it, now we've lost that tension. And when that starts to swirl out of balance, then it's like a loose cannon that can aim wherever it's pointed.
Right.
And we really don't want to go there. So yeah, you're right. It's got to be the individual.
I appreciate that. I used a hot topic
word,
and
I know.
You clarified it well. Good job. So moving on, how do our preventative healthcare choices help individuals and families to take more control over their personal health? Considering our culture and the state of our traditional healthcare system today.
Okay, so for the benefit of the people who are hearing, can you say that one more time? Because that's a long question. There's a lot to that. I'll pull it apart, but let's say it one more time.
So, how do our preventative healthcare choices, how can they help individuals, ourselves, or our families, to take more control, personal control, over their personal health, especially considering the culture we live in and the state of our traditional healthcare system today?
Ooh. And there's some loaded questions today.
This
is good because this is what people want to talk about. First of all, I've got to be, again, transparent. Doctors don't make any difference as far as change. We think we do, but the thing that makes the difference, if we can inspire a thought and the person agrees with it and holds on to it, then change happens.
Like what?
So I say when people come into my practice, changes in your life will be made by you doing things outside and in the kitchen.
Okay.
Way more than they're ever going to be made in here, because you're not going to make any lifestyle choices in my office that are going to be, wow, it was my office visit with Dr. Mazone that changed my life. No, it's your daily choices. It's your personal daily choices that determine your health. I'm going to say that again. It's your personal daily choices that determine your health way more than anything else, including medications, including doctor's visits, anything. And when we say preventative, what we're really saying is make good choices now so that you can experience good health later, right? Make good choices in your diet, in your exercise, in your attitude, like we just talked about with hope. I teach a thing that has 8 principles of health. And if you do those, then you have a population that's been studied around the world. People that do these things live on average 7 to 11 years longer than the average American. Whoa! And they live better. So it's these choices that they make every day. And it's tough because a lot of times our choices, we just don't think about them. It's what we did, it's what we grew up with our family, it's what's easy, it's what might feel good for the moment, but we're not slowing down and saying, let's think about this. Where do we want to be? And here's why it's important, because when we talk about freedom, we got to think about our choices now, because that's going to determine where we're going to go.
Right.
And for our health choices, we got to think about our choices today, because that's where we're going to end up. I say to all my people who come in, because I'm a pilot, so I love using pilot things, I say, when you get into your late 40s and 50s, you set your rate of descent. Right? Is it going to be is it going to be a nosedive where you don't care about health and you're just coming down? Or is it going to be a nice, comfortable descent where you go through your 50s and your 60s and your 70s and you're vibrant and you're strong? Because I've got both. I've got 40-year-olds that look like they're 80. I've got an 80-year-old who looks like he's 50.
Sure.
So your preventative choices are huge because it's the same concept. If I think that a hospital or a doctor or a group of experts is going to provide health, then I'm putting my freedom and my expectation in a place that's not appropriate because they can't handle that. I can't think for all my patients. I don't know all their unique circumstances. I can listen and we can talk and we need to because I can help them. I say I'm kind of like a pilot in the harbor. It's your ship. You're the captain of your ship. You know where it's going. You know the individual issues. But in certain waters, like the pilot comes on board a ship, I know the waters really well. I know what's going to damage your hull, right? I know what to avoid and what to go towards. But you still make the choice.
Good.
And if you listen to good preventative care, then you avoid getting in a situation where you're trying to make up care in the emergency department or with surgeries or things later on. Now, certainly those happen. And don't hear any of this negative. I'm a family doc. I love surgeons. I love emergency care people. We all have our role. Again, it's beautiful when all of us do our role. But what I see that impacts our health the most is our daily choices with preventative health and teaching that up to others. Now, our healthcare system, that was the last part of that question, is taxed right now.
Sure.
We are straining and there's not enough people and we're trying to do our best. This is one of those times where I would encourage people to really have mercy. Your healthcare providers are working overtime. They are trying to take care of you and they are tired. And they're human and they're not perfect. Again, we got to help each other out and create a society where we're not so angry. When people even make mistakes, in our government, it's not about being angry. It's about trying to help all of us make a good choice. And so this is a difficult time because the hospitals are overrun and they're understaffed and they can't provide the kind of care that they would like to. And so we have to do ourselves, again, it's that self-responsibility thing that keeps coming up. And if we do, the beautiful part about that is we avoid all that. If you make these choices, you have anywhere between, depends on the studies, 80 to 90% chance of avoiding any of these chronic diseases if you just make good preventative care choices. Wow. There's no med that's like that.
Right.
There's no medical procedure that's like that. Choices by far are the top of the stack for your health.
That's good. That's good. So with that, we end up going back to personal freedom.
Yes.
Personal choice. And acknowledging that it starts here. We're all thankful for what doctors, medical professions have done for when we've gotten into waters that we can't help ourselves. The cancers, the different things that have happened.
Yes.
And yet, even then, the medical profession is doing their best to help us.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so important that we start with the helping ourselves,
Right.
by making those choices, using our self-government to be able to see freedom last, right?
Exactly. I think there's a classic example. I have people in my practice that have used a full range of treatments for their cancer and have done well. All their chemotherapeutics, all the radiation. I have other patients who say, I don't want to do that, and they've done well. I have patients who've done the full range of care with cancer and have not done well. And I have patients who have refused a lot of that and not done well.
Sure.
So given the fact that there's no guarantee, even with cancer, the freedom has to come back to the individual. Because the common thread for all four of those is they got to decide. And they made the choice that they thought was right for them.
That's good. That's good. All right. Why is connecting with others, here we are at community, why is connecting with others of like mind vital to preserving freedom and resisting tyranny? There's another, keep loading.
These
this,
questions,
right?
they're coming today. Okay, read it one more time.
So, why is connecting with others of like mind vital to preserving freedom and resisting tyranny?
Oh, Chris, so forgive me, but I'm going to turn that one upside down. It's not bad to connect with like-minded people. I have a dear family friend who had said, I only want to connect with like-minded people. And my thought was sadness. I have learned more from unlike-minded people than I've ever learned from like-minded people. I love it when people challenge my thoughts and are willing to engage in dialogue about the understanding and not trying to prove that we're right, but are willing to just lay it out. Let's figure it out. Right? This is what I believe and why. What do you believe? That sharpening that happens when we sharpen each other from different viewpoints is vital. Now, I'm not agreeing totally with that. You need both. It's okay to meet with like-minded people. It's okay to understand that, but we have to be very careful to avoid a thing called groupthink, which is if we all think the same way, it's got to be right because all of us think it, right?
All patting each other on the back.
And if you look at our history, I'll go back to President Kennedy in the 60s. President Kennedy had the Bay of Pigs in early 1960s where he had advisors that were very like-minded. And they all thought Bay of Pigs, piece of cake, not going to be a problem, right? Yeah, we're going to do this and it's going to go great. It didn't go that way. They didn't check their desire for reality against reality. It was very interesting. President Kennedy learned from that afterwards, and he did the Cuban Missile Crisis came after that, and he deliberately put people who were not like-minded in his advisory cabinet so that there wouldn't be groupthink, so that you could challenge concepts with the idea that if you're willing to challenge concepts that remain standing are solid concepts.
Right.
And concepts that can't bear the weight, you gotta let them go. Even if you love the concept, you gotta let them go, right? And I've had some of those, maybe you have.
Absolutely.
So the goal again with freedom is we should talk to each other, like-minded or unlike-minded, so that we can come away with the best understanding. Now, it's important to talk about like-minded. You talked about preserving freedom and resisting tyranny. In my mind, and I'd love to hear your point on this, there's a difference in that question.
Well, before you go there,
Yeah,
can I ask you this?
sure.
Because you're talking about both sides, but we live in a culture that's just not comfortable with confrontation. And I don't mean confrontation
I know.
where you're,
Yeah.
I'm talking about confrontation where we're trying to either know one another, better one another. I mean, what is confrontation or the fear of it saying about us personally, do you think?
I think that I find this with some of the teenagers in my practice. The ones that are scared and are uncertain want to present a front of utmost certainty. And you can call it false bravado or whatever you want to. there's a need sometimes when we aren't certain to pretend that we are, because it's super uncomfortable to say 3 words. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
It's uncomfortable for doctors. We're trained, right? You gotta know, and people come to you for information. I have gained more trust with my patients when I say, you know what? I don't know. Because they know you're telling them the truth.
Right.
If we could be strong enough to realize that all of us don't know. Some people come up like it, got all the answers. If we were truly honest, we know. No one knows all the answers. So to me, that's the issue, is why we're engaged in this is we want to believe that we know. And leaders, this is hard for leaders, hard for doctors, hard for leaders. When you're put in a position of leadership, you're expected to know. And yet, if we look at this from a medical standpoint and what we're currently dealing with, there's been some frustration that's come into my clinic because the recommendations over this whole time frame have changed and changed and changed. And what I tell people is, we're going with the best information we have at the time. That's going to change because we don't fully know. Again, why you're going to have to make choices for you is because there is no perfect agency out there that knows. And if we could be honest about that and just come forward and say, you know what, I don't know, but this is what I believe, and I'd love to talk about it. I find when I do that, people are willing. Now, some people are so needing to be right that they're going to push you, and that's okay. That's where they are. We talk about this term tolerance, and I love the word, but let's talk about what tolerate means. If you tolerate something, it means I don't agree with that, but I'm going to tolerate it, right? Which is very different from I love that and I want to embrace that, and you and I are, right?
Yes.
Toleration is beautiful because what it says is, even though I don't really see it that way, I care about you. And I want to honor you and your freedom to think the way you think.
So unity and diversity.
Yes! And we don't want to lose that now. So that's what I think with this whole like-minded. We should not be scared. People are genuinely really trying to think the right things. And you'll know the ones that are maybe trying to use you. But challenge yourself. It's okay. It's how we learn. I tell you, I grew up eating junk. And it was yummy, but it was junk. And it was what we thought was okay at the time. It's not my parents' fault. It was what all my friends ate. And I look at it now and go, oh, that was bad, right? But I don't judge it because we were just doing the best that we can. And if we could do that for each other, we wouldn't have it. So
that's good. So in tearing that question apart by pulling it away from like-minded only, have you already answered the whole part of resisting tyranny?
To a little bit. I think, again, we have to do it individually. We have to preserve, promote, protect, and I love that. That's homeschoolers' way. We want to do this for homeschooling freedoms, but really for all freedoms. Our goal should be, if I let your freedom go, ultimately I've let myself down. Because you and I are connected. And all of us are connected. So we shouldn't be okay with anyone losing their freedom. The way to resist tyranny is for all of us to come together and say, everyone's viewpoint is important, and we will not allow someone to push away to, there's a bunch of different technology terms, and I know you all know those, but it's this concept of, if I don't like you, I'm going to shut you down. You can do it the old-fashioned way by silent treatment, right? You can do it the modern way by deplatforming or whatever you want to call it. But we should be afraid of that, because what it says is, I don't respect you. And because I don't respect you, I'm going to take away your freedom. All that's happened in history is it just goes back and forth until there's no freedom for anyone. We don't want that. And that's why in my practice, it doesn't matter so much what you believe, as long as we talk about it. You arrive at the right choice for you, and as a doctor, I help you as best as I can. It's not about cloning little me's. That's wrong. It's about respecting the diversity of health. And so that's the big thing for tyranny, is to just remember, other people don't determine our freedom. We can't allow that. And we have to preserve it, we have to promote it, which means we got to talk about it. We have to protect it, which means when it's happening, even if it's scary to talk about, even if it's not popular to talk about, we got to talk about it. We have to just say, in a nice way, my biggest concern right now in our society is if we're not careful, we're going to go back and forth on different sides, and we're just going to get more and more angry, and we're going to try to hurt one another more and more until it's out of control. Now it's a fear, and I'm supposed to replace that with hope. I can't change society, but I don't need to bring that. If you disagree with me, great. I want to hear what you have to say.
So good.
So,
very good.
That's what my suggestion. I'd love to hear your point on that.
No, I can't better that. And not that it needs to be. It's just that for us, yes, we need to be able to get over the insecurity that keeps us from confrontation. But there is this idea where our society is geared to the point where we can feel very alone in it.
Yes.
And so it is important to be in a community, to be where you are unconditionally accepted,
right?
Where we can brainstorm, spirit storm about paths forward, and know that we're on that right mind. I don't think it should always be like you mentioned, in a vacuum where everybody is yesing one another.
Right.
But at the same time, I don't know that even exists. It doesn't exist in my household. We all have our own mind and way of looking at things. And so anyway, I like that.
I would like to just end on this question on an important thing. There was a study that was done a number of years ago. It was really fascinating. And what they did is that they had 8 volunteers, and they were supposed to look at a piece of paper, and they had different choices, A, B, or C, which line was longer, which line was shorter, and it was obvious. And what number 8 didn't realize was number 8 was the only one being tested. 1 through 7 had a script. And so they went through the first few where A was longer, C was longer, B was longer, and they go down. Number 1, A. Number 2, A. Number 3, A. Number 4, A. Number 5, A. Number 6, A. Number 7, A. Number 8, A. Easy. And number 8's thinking, oh, this is easy, right? But then they switched it. Later on, they got it close, but it was still obvious which one was longer, but 1 through 7 would say the wrong thing. And number 8, more often than not, would say and agree with the other 7. Even though that person knew it wasn't right. We can't lose sight of the fact that we are a society, and that there's a push in society to want to be accepted. That's absolutely natural and good.
Right.
We have to balance that with being accepted. Doesn't mean you have to change who you are. You got to be honest about who you are. Again, it's freedom. And we got to respect the fact that, okay, I'm a little different, and each of us can see it differently, but we shouldn't have to change ourselves to be a part of it. That's the danger that I see sometimes, like I said, when you get big things that push for a certain agenda, is that people want to kind of go along. So we have to be careful with that.
That's good. That's good. All right, let's move to the next one. How can we speak to friends and family about the dangers that lie ahead as we continue to lose freedoms, especially when the issue is often so divisive?
So that's what we just talked about. So
we did hit on that.
The question is, are we losing freedoms? And some people would say no, or maybe refining or doing them. Other people would say yes, we are. I think when you have a concept of a group telling you what to do, definitively you're losing freedoms. Some people would say that it's okay to lose freedoms in certain circumstances. I think that's dangerous, because if freedoms aren't given by the government, then the government should never say, yeah, we need to take your freedoms. And there should be a definite metric, if you're going to have that, where it can't be ongoing. It has to be for a set time, and there has to be oversight to make sure we got checks and balances in our government about making sure that something doesn't go wrong and stay wrong. And we need checks and balances in our families. And it's divisive sometimes. Take a look at Washington, D.C. It can be divisive, right? Take a look at in our world, it can be divisive. But to not be afraid to be a check or a balance in your family, in your community, in your friendships, with your doctor. I love it when people come in and say, I just read this thing and it says this and this. And I said, whoa, I haven't seen that.
Right.
That's a check and balance. If I can't learn from my patients, something's wrong with me. Because this is about the two of us making choices together. And patients all the time have great ideas. And the best is when their great ideas and my experience come together.
Amen.
So I would say on that with your family, even if it's divisive, don't be afraid to be a check and balance, and also to respect. If they're not in a position where they can hear what you believe, don't change yourself. Don't pretend like you're something else. But also I see this a lot. My suggestion would be, don't flaunt it in their face. Right? Because sometimes you want to prove you're right. And that happens in families and other places. But what we should be after is, let's find right together. Right? Because I'm not right. Right is outside of that. I want to see what's right. And right means it should work over and over and over. And it should work for you and for me. There's certain things that really all of us could agree on that are right. And then there's a whole host of things that we have different viewpoints on.
Right.
But I think for us, let's not make it divisive.
As much as possible.
As much as we can.
Yeah.
Good.
I just think the one thing that I've found true is that we need to own our story and be able to share our story. Not just our facts, not just this is what I believe, or just cold hard facts. It's when we share our story, I was going to share, I don't know, I don't want to get divisive here. So let me just keep it this. My story puts flesh in the game, and this is why I've made this decision. This is why I am making this choice based on my story, what I've gone through, what I've experienced, what I have found to be true in my life, and what's worked for me.
Right.
And many times I've found that when I'm talking to someone who doesn't necessarily agree with me, was willing to listen to my story, all of a sudden they still may not agree with me, but they will tolerate me.
Right.
And we can begin to have a relationship. And so I would certainly hope that's true with friends and family. But at the same time, it goes back again to question number one, and you addressed it.
Right.
Freedom and love need to be held in tension. Not that we're not talking to one another to convince one another,
Right.
to change one another.
Right.
We want to have communication with one another. We want to be able to learn from one another. I genuinely want to understand why you think the way you think, or believe the way you believe.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love it if you would want to know that from me as well. So,
and medically, I'll bring it back. When I've done that for my patients, I'll give you an example. Someone smokes. There's a good reason why they're doing that. I used to think I just had to give them information. I'm just going to share the facts. You know that's bad for you, don't you?
Right.
And they go, yes, I know it's bad for me, right? When I started looking at them as a person that has a good reason to do what they do, and trying to find out their story.
Yeah.
And I ask them, why do you smoke? And I affirm them, you have a good reason. It may not be a good way of finding health, but you have a good reason for smoking. And I've gotten some amazing responses. It's calming. It's my personal time. I had a waitress tell me one time, it's the only break I get during a shift. And I need the peace of being able to pull out for a little bit of time. Those are great reasons. And then you ask the question, do you want to continue to do it this way? It's still their choice.
Right.
But when you can honor somebody enough to hear their story, then it doesn't have to be divisive. It's divisive when I come in and say, smoking's wrong and you need to...
Yeah.
Right? If I can honor their freedom and understand them, then the best success that my patients have had is when we do that, and when they're ready to see a different way and they feel like they're safe enough, honored enough, and that it's their choice, that's when success happens.
Very good.
And I believe that that's true, not just in medicine, but with any relationship. So maybe if it's divisive, try something new with your family. Go to them and say, you know what? I just want to hear everything you think on this. And I'm not going to say a word, which would be tough for me. But it would be interesting to see what happened, right?
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
So good.
Right.
All right, kind of in closing, what can we do as individuals, families, and even small groups to prevent further loss of medical as well as other freedoms. So what's some practical things?
It's a great question. I think that's a good way to close. What can we do? You know, for me, this goes back to the hope question that we had. You, I, Chris, we can't change society, but we can be a force for good in society. You know, I love that story about the starfish and the guys on the beach, right? And there's these starfish, right? And they're all gonna die because the tide is out. And the guys there throwing starfish back into the water. And someone comes up and says, you know you're not gonna save all the starfish, don't you? You're not even really making a difference. And the guy said, well, I made a difference to this one. You're right, I can't save all the starfish. I can't change this world. But if I can spend time with one person with a goal to try to make their life better, if I can encourage one person to think about freedom, to get involved, because we all have resources. See, this is the beautiful part about freedom. If we allow people to be free, everyone has a different thing that they're good at, something that they're capable at. And if we come together, it's like our body. My hands, my fingers aren't the same as my ears, right? But I don't say, oh, I just want fingers and I don't care about ears, or I don't care about eyes, right? Everything has a job. If we could just figure out what's my talent, how can I invest? Maybe you teach your kids homeschooling about freedoms. Maybe you talk to your kids if you're not homeschooling at night about freedoms. Maybe you get involved in some group and encourage that somehow. Maybe you write a letter to your congresspeople and tell them, this is what I think and why, and this is important. Maybe if you're Christian, you decide that you're going to pray, or maybe you're going to help another group that is underserved, or there is 1,000 ways for you to connect. Question is, what are your resources? And you can feel like, well, it doesn't make a difference. I can't change everything. But if we can all agree to change one, if there was 10,000 people on the beach throwing starfish, all of a sudden now it is an impact. And so there are resources out there. My biggest encouragement would be, do not allow this situation to get you paralyzed in fear. You can do something, even as an individual. As a matter of fact, that's the only way we can really do things, right? You can make a difference and be strong to be able to do that. And I would encourage you, look for ways to give back and to do things that provide for this. If there's division in your home and that's what's coming to you, I do this again with the smoking, or with drinking, or with diet, or with exercise, or with not drinking water or medications. I ask the patients, you know what the thing is. What's the one thing that you know you need to change right now? It is amazing how accurate patients are. They know what they need to change. So I don't focus on the thing that they don't want to change. I focus on the thing that they're ready to change. What's the area right now for you that you know, this is the thing that I need to change? This is the thing that I need to get involved with. Don't silence that voice. If that's what's coming and that's what you know is right, do it. Get involved. And don't allow society or other people to dictate whether you're doing a good job or a bad job. Because in the final analysis, your input's the only thing you control. And you just think about what would happen if all of us did that. It would be so much better of a world. And that also means that your yes should be yes and your no should be no. What do I mean by that? Medically, if freedom looks like you standing up and saying, yes, I'm doing this, then do it. Not because your doc said it or didn't say it, not because other people said it, then do it. But let it be your choice. And if your medical choice is no, that's where it stops. Your choice is no. Not because someone else said it or didn't say it, but because you believe it's right. Do it. That's a fundamental place that you can start. With your kids, do the same thing. But for me, I'll end on what we had talked about. When you do it, remember to balance those two things of freedom. Now, we can call them different things. They're based on love, but what I call them is justice or truth or doing what's right, right? And mercy or kindness, because we have to be humble and realize that we're not always right, right? If we balance those two, meaning we can disagree agreeably, We can get involved and encourage others without making fun of them or telling them they're wrong or they need to be re-educated or any of that stuff. If we can engage in a way that's positive, then we made a difference. And that brings freedom back because we have to own our own freedom. It's been given to us. It's been endowed by our Creator. And I believe that. And in our country, we're founded on that. So own it and use it. But use it respectfully. Use it kindly. Use it in a way to encourage others to do the same.
I agree. We've already talked about quite a few. I mean, staying in community.
Yep.
We've talked about hearing other point of views. We've addressed several things.
Mm-hmm.
You took one of mine just at the end there,
Sorry.
which is no, it's great. I was going to say, speak your truth,
Mm-hmm.
but speak it in love.
That's right.
Speak it with a realm of honor and respect for who you're speaking to.
Yes.
Not to lord it over them, but to share it. It's our story. It's my story. And, I say that to say this, we can't lose our voice. It needs to be heard. It just needs to be heard in respect. It needs to be heard. And maybe it isn't received in respect, but that's why we can't lose our voice. We keep talking. We keep not just bringing mine, but our unified voice, for what we believe is true.
Mm-hmm.
And so, on top of that, we may not always have communities we can get into to hear and share from a different point of view, but we can read books. We can open ourselves up to try to truly understand where people are coming from. I do this all the time, even as a pastor, to try to understand different points of view, different beliefs. Why, how, what's different? Mm-hmm. And so that we could find even what is similar.
Mm-hmm.
Because I believe, down deep, we have some very divisive issues ahead of us right now. But at the core, I want to believe we want the same thing.
I believe it, yeah.
But if we use our freedom for ourselves, my way or the highway, sometimes we end up chewing one another up to the point where we do harm and we end up with neither. So freedom or love. So
I agree. I think to end from on a medical note, I would encourage us to remember this is a relationship. My family medicine practice, my patients, it's a relationship. It's not about getting everything right the first time. We make mistakes. I make mistakes sometimes in what I recommend. They make mistakes in how they do it sometimes or what they want to do. It's about coming back together time after time. It's about learning together. It's about me sharing what I want best for them. And if we were to have that concept of a relationship in our society, I don't want to prove I'm right. I want what's best for you. And I'm going to respect you to choose because it's a relationship. If we really saw one another as a family, as a relationship, as trying to do what's best for each other, our medicine would be so much better, but our lives would be so much better.
That's right.
And so I would just encourage us to remember, we're not against people. If we're gonna have, quote unquote, something to go against, let's go against bad thinking. Let's go against things that are wrong philosophically, right? Let's go against things that just don't stand up to the test of time, but never let us go against one another, right? Because that kind of love, that kind of honoring is freedom. It's what I want. I believe, again, I'm making a big statement, but I believe that's what everyone really wants.
I agree. You're a medical doctor, you're a family practice, there's those that also care about the spiritual side, there's the soulish mental capacity side, whether it's psychiatrists, what have you.
Sure.
There are times where we've just got to unplug from the narrative. We've got to unplug from what's going on around us in the realm of whether that's simple as turning the TV off or unplugging from social media.
Sure.
There's sometimes where we've got to take care of ourselves.
And we have to think for ourselves.
And we
too.
have to think for
because
ourselves.
the narrative, and I'm not, please hear me on this, I'm not saying, well, that narrative's bad, look at that. I'm saying there are narratives. They're out there.
Right.
But we don't have to be defined for them. When they come, just realize it's a viewpoint and look at it and play with it and ask hard questions. See if it really is a good viewpoint or not. See if it's something you want to embrace, but don't just take it in. And a lot of times, unfortunately, with all of our media, because a lot of times if somebody just talks to you and you're taking it in media-wise, you're not really thinking, wait a second, does that make sense?
Right.
So I agree, unplug, think for yourself.
So good.
Yeah.
Zach, thank you for taking time today. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to share. Thank you for hearing us, and we pray that the discussion that is begun today would continue, that you would continue the discussion with your friends and family, and let's do this right.
That's right. And I would also say, if you disagree with us, let us know. And if you agree with us, let us know. Or if you have other questions, let us know. I mean, let's create an environment where it's okay to come together and discuss.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Zach.
Thanks, guys.